Hey, so we're going through the book of John, as you know, and there's an important key that unlocks the mystery of the rest of the book that we're excited to share with you today. One important key to unlock the book of John.
That is coming up. Check it out. Today's episode is brought to you by Logos. Learn more about the world's best Bible study software at logos.com/themove. Today's episode is John chapter 1, verses 43 to 51.
The question is, have you read it? If you have not, it's in the something section. What's that called?
The doobly-doos?
Yeah, it's in the section. You can check it out. And we'll put 10 minutes on the clock, and we will begin in 3, 2, 1, go.
Boom.
So here's a question I do have for you. We're coming to the conclusion of chapter 1, and I want to ask you, what is your takeaway thus far in chapter 1?
Ooh, what is my takeaway from chapter 1 so far? I think where we ended our last episode was really potent to me.
Yeah.
That from the beginning of time, God has always been, right?
Yeah.
Right? If you can't even use the language, since the beginning of time, God has always been.
Yeah.
But God has always known who I am, what I would do, both good and bad, and He's always had a plan for my life. He's always had a vision of who I am in light of what Jesus would do. I just get to live that out.
Bro, that sounds really deterministic.
Deterministic? You can use whatever language you want, but it's truth.
Well, in the sense that he knows like one plan for your life, and now you're just kind of walking it out. Like there's this one set plan, and now you're filling it in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that bad?
Well, I don't think it's biblical. I don't know if it's bad or good.
So then, if it's not, then it's not good.
I mean, hey, man, you get to call it for yourself. We were just having that discussion of what is the good, right? You can call that out. I don't think it agrees with Bible, and I don't think that's what you're trying to say.
Right.
So if you could flesh that out for us, just a touch.
What I'm saying is that what reality is based on is based off what God says.
Yeah.
What God determines. See, there's that word again. That's such a good word. Give me help. You know what I'm trying to say here.
Yeah, I think that so far, especially what we finished the last episode with, is that God speaks better things over our life than we ourselves can see.
We are better than who we first believed we were. There's a good takeaway.
Yeah,
that's what we said before.
And that we have we were created to stand in His presence, blameless, holy, before Him in love, so that any walk of life we choose, we get to walk it out in the purpose that's always been ours, and that is to shine according to the truth of who we are. So whether I'm a basketball player, whether I am an accountant, whether I'm a lawyer, whether I'm a caretaker, whether I am an itinerant preacher who does random podcasts with a friend who I didn't know we had the same name.
Same name.
Right? Whatever I choose to do, I have the privilege of shining because I know who I am in all and every circumstance, so that in all things I can do because I know who strengthens me, right? I think somebody said something like that somewhere.
Yeah, it said somewhere, written down once or twice.
Right, so something that I really like about John chapter 1 thus far, and this is a bit of a review because what we're going to start going into is that you absolutely see a setup that John is using so many Old Testament elements. Mm-hmm. He's bringing them he carefully just dropping them in just the first chapter, right?
Yeah.
Just dropping all these Old Testament elements, indicating to us that, like, listen, this story is the story that's already been told, but it's being told in a totally different way, in a new way, although it's an old story, right?
Yeah.
And it's being lived out in this person, right? And again, in these verses, you have Old Testament elements yet again, right?
Okay. No, show us.
Yeah, so we start here where we, Philip, Andrew, and
Nathaniel,
Peter are now together.
Yeah.
Right? The next day, Jesus decides to go to Galilee. He found Philip and said to him, "Follow me." Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. Philip found
Nathaniel,
hey,
what's up?
Gift of God, right? And said to him, "We have found him of whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote." So you have here an indication that these men are somewhat versed in the Old Testament. They know these elements and like, man, we have found the one that the law and the prophets were writing about, right? And if you know anything about the time when Jesus was born, there is a prophecy in the book of Daniel.
Yeah.
About 490 years, right?
Yeah.
That are determined for the children of Israel. And that sometime in this 490 year, when it begins to wrap up, the Messiah will show up, right? And a lot of scholars have noted that where that prophecy begins, it concludes right around the time when Jesus shows up.
Right around 27 AD.
Somewhere around there, right? Depending on where you started. But, somewhere that's really good on this is if you listen to some N.T. Wright. N.T. Wright does a great breakdown on this, right? That what happens is that the people were waiting for a Messiah to show up precisely because they were reading the Old Testament.
Yeah.
And the Old Testament elements of what is happening in John chapter 1 is in agreement with the culture and the expectation of the day that some sort of Old Testament fulfillment and prophecy is happening.
This is something that's really important to point out, that there is a cohesiveness. Certainly we're seeing this played out in this chapter, but there's this cohesiveness between Old and New Testaments. That in order to really get to the depth of New Testament, we have to at least be conversant on Old Testament. Part of the major reason why so many of these people, when they heard Jesus, when they heard John, they saw these things, they're like, connections are being made. This is what it's all about. It's because of Old Testament. And yet what I see in Christianity today is this kind of shrugging off of the old and only embracing the new, as if the new is what mattered and the old didn't matter. I mean, okay, cool, I get it. Jesus is there. Jesus is what truly matters. He's the fulfillment of all these things. But what is he actually fulfilling? What are all these things if you throw away the old? Yeah.
And you can't do that. And I like this appeal you made to both testaments. And we understand that testament actually stands in for covenant, right? This idea of old covenant, new covenant, and also the idea of two domains, right? Because in the Old Testament, what you have are these domains of, we talked about this yesterday in private conversation, heaven and earth. Yeah. Right? You have heaven and you have earth, and they're inextricably linked at the beginning of the story, right? Yep. In the beginning, he made the heavens and the earth, right? But what happens is that because of the fall in the Old Testament, the idea is that there is then a rendering, an asunder, a cutting of these two domains. There is now heaven and there is now earth. And the story is like, how do these two come back together? Again, this Old Testament telling, right? Look at this. Jesus sees Nathanael. Nathanael's coming towards him. He says, behold, an Israelite in with whom there is no deceit. Now, this is a callback to last episode, how Jesus speaks the truth of somebody's life over them, right? There's a prophetic word he's speaking and a word of knowledge. Verse 48, Nathanael said, how do you know me? Right? Which is a question sometimes some might ask, like, how does God know me? Right? Says, I saw you under the fig tree. I saw you. Rabbi, you're the Son of God.
Which is really weird, because he's just like, oh, I saw you. You're over there. It's like, oh my goodness, this is the answer to everything. No, so clearly the word I saw you doesn't mean like, oh, I saw you walking down the street. Jesus is giving a nod, a little winky wink to Nathanael that there was something that was happening under the fig tree that was private in his own mind, that like he must have been wrestling through, praying through something. But when Jesus calls it out, he's like, oh my goodness.
And again, an Israelite with no guile, no deceit, somebody who is, his friends are making an appeal to the prophecies, the law, Moses, so we can surmise that Nathanael is one that's well-versed, given over to all of these things. And when Jesus says, I saw you, it's like he's bringing all of that to bear in that moment. And Nathanael's like,
wow.
Right?
Yeah.
And then the next line, what happens next is what gets me.
Okay. Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel. 3 words. I saw you.
Right.
Boom.
Right.
This is who you are. I realize it.
Now why? So Jesus is answering, oh, because I said I saw you under the fig tree. Because of that? Huh? But yeah, I think Jesus being somewhat playful, like, oh, because of that? Oh, hold up.
Yeah. Wait till you see what's coming up next.
You will see greater things than these. And he said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, you will see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man. Mind blown. What Old Testament story is he hearkening to here?
He's talking about a story where angels are ascending and descending. There was a song that I sang when I was younger in church. We are climbing Jacob's ladder.
Right? Yeah. Jacob has left home because under
stolen the birthrights, running away from
circumstances,
Esau, sleeping on with a rock for a pillow, has a vision. Right? The vision is a great ladder, angels coming up and down from heaven and earth.
And he makes this connection of like, man, if you bring me back to my family, you will be my God, right? This is what Jacob says in that moment, right? You will be my God. I'm going to give myself over to you. And it happens over the 20-year course.
So Jesus is taking this story and he's tweaking it slightly because it's no longer a ladder, but he's saying you'll see them ascending and descending on
me. And what's happening, that in Jacob's story, the domain of heaven and the domain of earth,
which there was a separation of because of sin,
are being united through this ladder. But Jacob is also the one who embodies the promise of how these two domains will be united. And Jacob carries the promise, and through his lineage, because he is grandson of Abraham, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, he's a grandson of Abraham. We're going overtime. We're going overtime. Jacob carries that promise, that lineage, that seed, covenant, the history and the prophecy of Old Testament that then bears itself out, plays itself out, all the way to when you get to the end of the book, Malachi, it closes with Elijah's gonna come. Elijah shows up, John chapter 1, and who else shows up? The promise of what Jacob saw all the way back in that vision, that these two domains of heaven and earth would be united in the promise that Jacob carries. And behold, here's Jesus telling Nathanael, you've been thinking about all of these things. You've been pursuing this.
Here it is. I'm right here.
I'm right here.
I see you.
I see you. Do you see me?
Ooh.
Right? It's crazy how this cosmic story is being told in this one chapter. All of these elements just, right?
Yeah.
And so that Jesus, and before we turn into when this thing gets active now in John chapter 2, that there's this awesome sort of conclusion to John chapter 1, that Jesus has come from the domain of heaven, who was the Word, who has now come into darkness. Darkness does not overcome it. And it is through him that he's going to unite these things, angels descending in and on him. And now he's asking Nathanael, an Israelite with no deceit, like, do I see you? I see you. Like,
There's such a beautiful, even just in this one chapter, beginning and ending and conclusion to this entire thing. And it gets better in chapter 2 because we get to see it lived out.
Yeah. We'll see you in the next 10.
Hey movers, I recently got to travel to the Logos headquarters and ended up recording several tutorials on how you and I can get more from our Bible study using Logos. To see the entire playlist of videos, visit logos.com/themove and get 10% off any Logos 8 product you want. logos.com/themove.